Orthodox neoliberals believe in the shock therapy treatment, that you shock a society, you disrupt wage protections for workers, increase exploitation, things will get worse and then they will get better. That's the orthodox belief. It hasn't worked really anywhere. I think the word is horrible. It was a horrible year. And I think it was horrible principally because of the war being prosecuted by Israel against the Palestinians. It's unimaginable. 25,000 people killed in the space of a very short period of time, 11, 12,000 of them children, most likely. The entire infrastructure of Gaza ruined, hospitals, universities, schools, Israeli tanks driving over civilian cars, just the devastation and the lack of action to be able to stop this that made the whole year horrible. I mean, look, if this didn't happen, it would have still been a difficult year, if we're honest. Not an easy year. It would still have been a difficult year. Tensions are up everywhere. The conflict in Ukraine is continuing. The wars taking place in Central Africa, including intensifying in Sudan and so on, all of that continuing. It was a great year anyway. But this terrible ongoing conflict, I think it defines for me 2023. And I really hope it doesn't continue to define 2024. Now I have to really dig back into my memory. As I get older, it gets harder to remember even last year with such precision. I mean, look, again, I'm afraid I'm a little stuck on this story. But what has been memorable for me have been the extremely brave people, the medical workers, the relief workers, the journalists, and others who have continued to try and provide services, the United Nations employees who've continued to try and provide services in the middle of a terribly difficult battlefield situation. I visited a number of battlefield situations. I can tell you it's not easy to operate there. Everybody is a target. You wear a jacket that says press. Nowadays, nobody respects that. So many journalists have been killed. I have lost friends, among the journalist fraternity in Gaza over the last several months. I've lost a number of friends, professors getting killed, and so on. But to see the medical workers, the aid workers, including UN employees, the journalists continue doggedly to do their job is incredible. The most amazing figure in that is my dear Wael Dawood, the journalist from Al Jazeera. The Israelis attacked his family home, killed his children, killed his family. He continued to report, crying, holding his child, walking down the street. He buries his child and then he goes back to send stories to Al Jazeera. Wael is a hero. And then his son, a journalist, is killed, again, and another attack. Heroic people. Day after day, medical workers, regardless of the danger to their life, continue to be out there. Hospitals getting attacked, they go back to work the next day. Not getting paid. What getting paid? The whole population of Gaza is starving. So when you ask me a question, what stands out? Well, they are the heroes of 2023. Definitely not anybody other than that. This year at the World Economic Forum, Argentina's new president, Javier Milei, said that the real heroes are the businessmen. That's what he said. No, Mr. Millet, businessmen are not heroes. They make money. The real heroes are people who serve the people. And those who serve the people in an adverse situation, like in a terribly brutal genocidal war zone, they are the heroes. For a head of government to go to Davos and say that businessmen are the heroes and fly the Israeli flag, it's shameful. Shameful, for the Argentinian people. A shameful thing. Firstly, it's for the Argentinians to decide as a people what they want to do with the international relations and so on. They can decide. The Argentinian people decided to elect a new government of Mr. Javier Milei, who is basically, going to break the social compact in Argentina. He won a fair election, I think. A large population voted for him. Why? Why did they vote for him? Well, look, I would say there's several things here. Argentina is a rich country. It has a lot of resources, but it has had terrible, terrible fiscal management for decades. Terrible. Going back at least 25, if not 30 years. Very poor fiscal management in Argentina. They haven't been able to take hold of this fiscal problem. They tried to make a deal with the IMF, which was catastrophic, the world's biggest IMF deal twice. Most recently, under the government of Mauricio Macri, man of the right. Catastrophic deal which has placed much greater debt burden on Argentina. Then they, in the middle, during Alberto Fernandez government, came to China, tried to get a currency swap deal with the People's Bank of China. They succeeded in getting that deal and so on. But the deal, before it could go forward, even the Fernandez government went back to the IMF, increased the debt burden. Now, what is going on there? What is happening there? I think part of it is that a section of the Argentinian elite, whether it is of the right or the center, the government of Alberto Fernandez, this section of the elite is extremely uncomfortable with the idea of breaking with their place in Western financial markets. Extremely uncomfortable. They don't want to make that break. These are countries, Argentina, for instance, very long association with the United States, with Spain, and so on. They don't culturally feel that they can make the break. In fact, when the finance minister of Argentina made the deal with the People's Bank of China, like a week later or so, he wrote a letter to the IMF saying that Argentina would like to return to the IMF in order to strengthen our position in the international financial markets. What they mean is Western financial markets. There's a cultural role here, unwillingness to break with the hegemony of the Wall Street complex. Try something new. Argentina went into the BRICS under the initiative of Brazil mainly. Brazil and Argentina, Brazil under President Lula, Argentina under President Fernandez had started a kind of South American integration project. They were thinking of a South American currency and so on. I interviewed the finance minister of Brazil, Fernando Haddad, very keen proponent of South American integration. But this was under the, in a sense, influence of Brazil. Within Argentina, I don't know if there was a consensus to develop these alternative practices, whether it's a South American integrated project or project, let's say, of the global South, relations with the People's Bank of China, the new development bank of the BRICS, and so on. I don't think there was an appetite, a consensus. Mr. Milei's policy of breaking with BRICS, going back to the West in a way, is actually representative of much more than the right wing in Argentina. It represents a section of the elite, which is uneasy with these new possibilities. Okay. Now, will it be a mistake? Hard to say. Argentina has been in such a difficult situation for over 20 years that it's hard to even imagine how they're going to pull things out. I mean, Mr. Milei already has exercised immense pain on the people of Argentina. Inflation is going to go up, but he is an orthodox believer in neoliberalism. He believes in the so-called J curve. If things are bad here, before it can get better, it has to get much worse, and then it'll get better. When you have a heart attack, the doctor doesn't come and go, oh, let me make you, let's hug you and make, no, they take electricity, right? And they shock your heart and you go, whoom, and your heart starts. Well, orthodox neoliberals believe in the shock therapy treatment, that you shock a society, you disrupt wage protections for workers, increase exploitation, things will get worse and then they will get better. That's the orthodox belief. It hasn't worked really anywhere. Okay, the J curve hasn't worked really anywhere. Mr. Milei is an orthodox believer He's not a practical thinker. He wants to impose the orthodoxy of the Chicago school on Argentina. And so that's where Argentina is going to be. Now, again, was it a mistake to break with the BRICS? I think it was a huge mistake personally, but it's for the Argentinian people to decide. I just feel, Ivy, it's too much to say that one election changes everything. It doesn't. There is an underlying consensus among the elites, which has to be better understood. Yeah. I think the most important story is the continuing war in Ukraine. The fact that that war is not advanced at all, that the West is preventing a peace agreement to be signed between the Russians and the Ukrainians, an agreement which would have major economic impact. The fact that Russia is being so isolated, the fact that Ukraine is a battlefield has meant that food prices have gone up, has meant that energy costs have gone up in many parts of Europe and so on. The world is struggling right now in a kind of price profit inflationary cycle. The big elites have been taking more and more profit out of the economy, the capitalist economy. And as they take profits out, prices are going up. This is a profit price inflationary spiral. The inflation is eating away the gains that working people have made around the world. It's a big story, this war, but also the fact that in 2023, we've seen billionaires grow their wealth around the world, at the expense of suffering people. Hunger rates are rising, poverty rates are rising, and so on. I mean, you're within the territory of China, where some of these things are going in the opposite direction. Some inflation is there because inflation doesn't stop at the border. Inflation can be imported in. But your inflation isn't what it's like in other parts of the world, which is catastrophic. So I would say another big story of 2023 is the story of the economic chaos, partly occasioned by the war in Ukraine and partly occasioned by the owners of capital who are taking greater and greater shares of profit out of the economy. The Palestinians have been occupied since 1948. Palestinians have been expelled and so on. But Israel has conducted this kind of war against the people of Gaza repeatedly since 2006. 2009 was terrible, 2014, and so on. At the time, nobody seemed to have the courage to act. Okay, that's the key thing. Nobody, no government said really anything. This time, the situation is different. There's a new mood that's there in the global south. This new mood comes from many different sources. One of them is the fact that the United States and the West is increasingly losing its legitimacy as the leaders of the international order. This is an important point. Previously, the United States would have come in and said, look, we are the honest brokers. We are neutral actors. We are going to try to mediate. Now it's nobody believes that they are mediators. Everybody sees when they veto things at the Security Council and so on, that they are basically enabling, if not driving this war, for their interests in the Middle East. So one is the absolute loss of legitimacy of the United States and the European bloc. Absolutely key. Second is the emergence of the global south, not just China, but other major countries in the south. Their economies are growing. India, Indonesia, South Africa is having an economic problem, but this mood is infectious. Brazil and so on. These countries became part of the BRICS project, which, it's an up and down project. Let's see where it goes. But it's created the basis for this mood. And it's interesting that South Africa, on the question of apartheid, has a lot of experience. The country was under a direct apartheid rule from 1948 till 1994, 30 years ago. People in government fought against apartheid. They sacrificed a lot to fight against apartheid. The generation in government now were young students fighting against apartheid. So we are not in a kind of post-apartheid era. They have a direct memory the foreign minister of South Africa, Naledi Pandor, her father was a major fighter against apartheid. She herself was in the student struggle and so on. Direct memory, right? But also, it's important over the course of the past several decades, South Africa has taken strong positions on the question of Israeli apartheid and so on, strong positions. But this is a different level. It's taken Israel to a dispute mechanism, International Court of Justice, using an instrument that's been available since 1948. It's not a new instrument, using an instrument available since 1948, but the first time really that a global south country has used an instrument like this. Very, very important. And that so many countries of the global south have backed South Africa, not just Muslim majority countries, might expect that, you know, country like, say, the Pakistan, Bangladesh, whatever, Muslim majority countries, but South American countries, Colombia, Bolivia, and so on. Why did they back this? Very important. So I take some hope from the fact in the middle of this horrible situation, I take some hope in the new mood that is there now in the global south. The new mood, this is one example of. And by the way, Germany came in and defended Israel at the International Court of Justice. And then Namibia attacked Germany. Now that's very interesting. Namibia is a very much weaker country than, let's say Brazil or India on the world stage. Small country. But Namibia used to be Southwest Africa, used to be a German colony. And in fact, what the Namibian president said was that you, Germany, are saying there's no genocide in Gaza. What do you know of genocide? You know a lot. And what did they point to? They pointed to the genocide between 1904 and 1908, genocide that the Germans did against the Herero and Namekwa people in Southwest Africa, now Namibia. And he said, you never apologized for this. Never apologized for this. So you don't have any legitimacy. I mean, that demonstrates the new mood in the global south. It's not just in South Africa. Also look at Namibia, yeah, Bolivia, and so on. So in fact, Israeli policy made the possibility of the two-state solution impossible for decades. Okay, that's 1994 Oslo Accords, 30 years ago. For decades, they have been undermining the two-state solution. So when now Benjamin Netanyahu says there is no two-state solution, he is merely reflecting an Israeli reality, not his opinion. So on the other side, what the Israelis seem to want, a three-state solution, which is to expel Palestinians to Jordan, Lebanon, and Egypt. Those are the three states. They want to annex all the territory. They don't want Palestinians there. They've said that again repeatedly now. So the Israelis are not willing to go for a two-state solution. And the two-state solution on the ground is not visible. How are you going to build it? In that case, the two-state solution idea is dead. But it remains official United Nations policy because of the day of the Oslo Accords and because nobody can imagine another approach. In the world today, in general, the expectation is that states must be democratic in some way. You can't have your people not have the right to do X, Y, Z, correct? We are also in a position nowadays to say that a states must be multi-ethnic, must give minority rights. There must be space for diversity in a country. We don't want to have a state where majority rule is the way forward, right? That's no longer acceptable in the world. Minorities must have full rights, not second class citizenship. That's apartheid. That's where we are across the world. Israel is an apartheid state. Why? Non-Jewish Israelis have second citizenship, second class citizenship. For instance, anybody in the world who is Jewish can come to Israel and live there. But Palestinians cannot return. Palestinians are barred. That shows you legally the form of second class citizenship. Palestinians can't rent apartments everywhere, don't have the same economic and political rights, and so on inside Israel. So, one of the arguments being made by a number of Palestinian groups is that Israel has to be transformed from an apartheid state into a democratic state with Palestinians having full citizenship and rights. Make it a one state. From the river to the sea means a one state. Democratize the whole state. That's an interesting approach. But the Israelis will not permit it, particularly the right wing in power, because they will then say, and they are saying, you see, Israel from 1948 has played a double game. On the one side, said Israel is a Jewish state, which is an ethno nationalist state, but also saying Israel is not formally a Jewish state. So Israel has so far had it both ways. It's a Jewish state, but it's not a Jewish state. If you say it should be a secular democratic state, the right wing forces will say that ends the ambiguity. Then Israel is no longer a Jewish state, which is not a Jewish state. It is simply not a Jewish state. You understand? Israel is not permitted to go down that road. And that is why there can be no easy solution in the region. Because the one logical solution, or the two logical solutions, have both been set aside. The Israelis have rejected the two-state solution, and the Israelis will reject the three-state solution. The only solution the Israelis will accept is the expulsion of the Palestinians. And that is completely unjust. And that is the reason why so many people are upset around the world. Well, it's really interesting because the Financial Times, which is one of the leading newspapers the world, had a long article on this year of democracy. Because you're right, something like 1 in 3 people are going to have new governments through some sort of election or the other, right? Russia, India, already Bangladesh has had an election, and so on, Turkey, huge number of countries. Okay. The Financial Times also, toward the end of the article, began to demonstrate some hesitation, saying, well, there'll be formal elections, but democracy as a process is not as strong as it was. They don't go into too much detail about that, but let's talk about a few things. Number one, most democratic systems, election systems in the world, where there's a bourgeois project, most election systems utterly overwhelmed by money, by the power of money. So that, for instance, it has become increasingly expensive to run an election due to the nature of technology. You have to buy advertisements. You have to conduct massive social media operations. Millions and millions and millions of dollars go into these projects of elections. The money power has really corrupted bourgeois democracy. Maybe it was always like this, but it's become worse. There's a qualitative change in the amount of money each year in India. Each parliamentary election cycle, there's more money spent than the previous one. Same in the US presidential election. More and more expensive. Okay? Money power. Secondly, media power. The power of the mass media. And the way in which critical media is being repressed. So in India, for instance, the government has gone after all the critical media, has jailed the founder of NewsClick, for instance, has arrested reporters. Very much a concern, for a democratic kind of process to not allow small media to exist. The power of media is immense, and those with the most money can buy the most media, right? That's important. Number three, there is a problem in countries where the right wing has an immense advantage. You see, the right wing doesn't have to actually create a politics. It just has to organize the politics. We as people inherit some pretty terrible things from the past. Gender hierarchies, hierarchies of society, different communities, religious hierarchies, things like that. Those hierarchies are already there in society. All that the right wing has to do is turn the key. India, for instance, you say Muslims are a problem, turn the key. You galvanize the majority. You can say women are getting too powerful, turn the key. You can galvanized a kind of patriarchal thinking. Right wing has a much easier time building a political project because they are just taking advantage of the past. So, in many of these countries, there's an advantage to the right and has historically been an advantage. And so, there'll be a lots of elections. Yes, that's true. But money power, media power, and then the advantage given to the right by history, these have to be absorbed. Elections aren't really free and fair. They are, in fact, often very expensive and unfair.